Hey, Emmanuel.
Good morning, Dan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Just trying to get this camera working the way I want it to.
All right. You look great, man.
Thanks. You do as well.
Thanks.
Congratulations on 18 and a half.
Thank you.
I know that it's been kind of making its way around festivals and really getting, positive feedback. How do you feel about that?
I feel great. I mean, especially with the pandemic, you make these films in a bubble. It was literally me and a laptop editing for, for a year. And just a small group of us who were seeing the film and commenting on it. And, normally in making a film like this, you would do, test screenings or something like that. And we just didn't have that opportunity. So, getting it out to festivals and seeing the response of a real audience to seeing it on the real screen and then to critics too is really fulfilling. And, can't say enough, great things about that response.
Before we get a little bit more into it, tell us a little bit about 18 and a half and what exactly audiences are going to see there.
Well, it's a historical fiction film about a young woman who works in the Nixon White House in 1974, who's a transcriber, and she gets a hold of the missing 18 and a half minute gap of in the Nixon Watergate tapes, which is this famous gap that kind of turned the tide in Watergate. And she wants to leak it to a reporter, and they wound up meeting at a seaside motel, and they run afoul of hippies, swingers, and nefarious forces out to get them. So it's kind of a thriller slash comedy. Tonally it runs the gamut, and but I hope it's a fun time for people.
It is, and I think about it because it's funny. I'm a real big sucker for this types of film. Then again, I'm a sucker for all kinds of films, so I don't think that's saying much. But there's something about revisiting scandals like that, and especially then having a different take on it and a different perspective on what could have happened, or just a story about it that is so attractive. What do you think attracts audiences to moments like this in history and to take a look at them again?
Well, I think one thing is that because it is historical, it happened 50 years ago, it people can kind of reflect on why it's relevant and and still resonates in their own, not just their own lives, but in the current political circumstance. I mean, you can read Trump into Nixon, or you could read Biden into Nixon if you so choose, but also in different countries. When we showed the film, in Brazil at the Sao Paulo International Festival, people were like, oh, this is really about Bolsonaro. And when we showed it in England, they were like, oh, this is really about Boris Johnson, a bumbling scandal with a bumbling president. So I think that's kind of the nice thing about doing any kind of period piece about sort of old scandals, is that you don't have to be hyper relevant. And also, as an indie filmmaker, you don't know when the film's going to come out and when people are going to see it or how long it's going to take to make. So, this kind of ensures that it stays timely in a thematic way, but not a, hyper specific way.
Yeah, sometimes releases just work out that way.
Yeah, exactly.
I know a couple of pandemic films that or series that when I talked to them, they were like, well, we made this years before that, and it was just kind of awkward that we
Right.
would need to release it. So yeah, but with the political climate the way it is, and we do not need to get into it. It's a good way to start a conversation. It's also a good way to have some fun with it, and
Mhm.
maybe even look at modern day things the same way.
Exactly. And part of the fun of this particular film is it's not really about Watergate. It's about these
Mhm.
characters and, and having fun with kind of the era of 1974, which is kind of pre-disco, but post 60s. And who are the different kinds of people? You still have the World War II generation. We're just still middle-aged at that era. So what did they bring to it? You have people coming back from Vietnam and kind of the immediate aftermath of Vietnam as it was kind of winding down. And so it was a way to explore all these different kind of societal things going on, during that era.
So the way it was shot, kind of with kind of a minimal crew, and you said you shot it during COVID. Regardless if it was during a pandemic, is this the way that you wanted to make this film?
Yeah, absolutely. Because we shot most of it before the pandemic. So
Oh,
we
okay.
started shooting on March 3rd, 2020. What could possibly go wrong in March 3rd,
Right.
2020? So we got 11 days in, and we found out we were the last film shooting in North America. And then we
Wow.
were like, okay, now we got to pull the plug. We only had 4 days left to go. So we took a 6-month hiatus, a healthy hiatus or pandemic pause. And then we were one of the first films to come back using the new kind of SAG and DGA protocols. But the nice thing about most independent films is that they kind of inherently do a lot of things that made sense for COVID protocols anyway. We were in a bubble. We were, all staying at a motel that was super isolated, 3 hours outside of New York. Everybody had their own bathrooms, everybody had their own rooms. So, and we were lucky that we had shot all of our kind of intimate scenes, the kissing, the dancing, the fighting scenes before our pandemic break. Because when we came back, the rules said you couldn't do any of those things. And we're like, oh, thank God we did them all, But the nice thing about indie films is you never have like crowd scenes of hundreds of thousands of people because you can't afford them anyway. So we didn't have to worry about like digital replicas or blow up dolls or, things that like the bigger productions really did have to worry about. And just even simple things like testing and masking. It's much easier if your crew is smaller and cheaper if your crew is smaller. But, that said, I'd rather not make a film during a pandemic.
well, let's cross our fingers and hope we won't have to do that again.
Yeah. Exactly.
So a film like this is very intimate. It almost has a play feel to me a lot of times because of the way the scenes are set up. How important was it to find the right pair? And in this case, you have Willa Fitzgerald, who's great. I talked to her yesterday, and then John Margot, and then their chemistry on screen.
Yeah, they just had amazing chemistry, and we didn't have a lot of time to rehearse or anything like that. They had just kind of met each other a few days before. But I think part of it was because we were all staying at this motel, we could shoot our 10-hour day or however many hours it was, and then we were all still together. We were all hanging out, having dinner, drinking wine, So I think that really lent itself to the chemistry among all the actors and the crew as well. But also both Willa and John have a lot of theater experience and, are both, but also have TV experience. So they could, they could memorize lines, which was really important, when you're doing these long one takes, which we did a lot. But that theater experience really helped them, but also, all the actors, Richard Kind, Vondy Curtis Hall, Kathy Curtin, Sullivan Jones had just come off of Slave Play, which got like 13 Tony nominations, So I think all of them really embraced, where it felt like a play, but also where it didn't, and what we could do that's different from a play.
So you mentioned something also Willa had mentioned yesterday about single takes, one takes. How much does that speak about an actor's ability to be able to do long takes?
It's tremendous amount because, a lot of filmmakers are like, oh, I want to do these long oneers. And then they find a cast that just can't pull it off, because you get different combination. And that's something I've learned, working with different actors, is you can kind of see which combinations of actors are going to be able to sustain a long takes because, they know their lines, they have a similar rhythm, similar pacing that's consistent. And then you find out which combinations of actors just are going to intrinsically lend themselves to, more traditional, cutting and editing styles. And once you kind of incorporate that and appreciate that for what it is, then you can go, okay, these actors, we can do these scenes as oneers, but these other ones, let's shoot them a different way. And that's okay. Like they don't all have to be oneers, so you use them when you can use them and when it serves the story too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, I think as the years go by and I watch more films, it's little things like that I appreciate more than others, because it really just speaks to just the preparation of the crew and the cast, and it's something that sometimes I could appreciate just as much as appreciating a an action sequence or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it's great. When you editing the film, did you already have a vision really of the look that you wanted to make sure it had, as far as it maybe looking a little bit older, and how was it shot?
Yeah, so we had a great cinematographer, El Schneider, who's got a real appreciation for the vintage look and feel that I do as well, from the 60s and 70s. And one of the kind of rules for everyone on the cast and crew was we're only going to do this thing as if we were shooting it in the 70s, as far as creative techniques. So there's no drone shots, there's no steady cams because they only came out in 1976. We used vintage lenses, but also the location really did 90% of the lifting. I mean, when you're shooting at this amazing motel built in the 50s and 60s, the Silver Sands Motel, and you can't really go too wrong with that. But we had a great production designer, Monica Dabrowski, who would move the furniture around, from the different parts of the hotel and put the best things in. And a great costume designer who collects vintage patterns. And so she would sew original costumes, but from vintage patterns. To the music, we only use, 60s, 70s era, instruments and recording techniques for the kind of bossa nova tropicalia soundtrack that we have. And so it was just and then down to the editing techniques for myself as the editor, just only doing things that could have been cut on film.
It was really well done. And I can't let you go without asking you about that opening sequence, because I thought it was really important. It was the scene was a little bit long, but we got to know so much about Connie and Paul and the way they not only interacted with each other, but also with the waitress and the way they ordered food and things like that. In putting that together, how important was it that we got to really got to know the characters then rather than through the story?
Well, it was, it's a tough scene because it was also the first day of shooting. It's like 11-page scene, but it's got to establish the characters. There's a ton of exposition in there, and how do you make it interesting? And so by using the Wonder Bread as the thing that she squishes up as the demo, that kind of was the key to that. And those actors really just knocked it out of the park. But it was, it was important to establish just also the tone of the film. Like, okay, we're going down the rabbit hole. Literally, she eats the Wonder Bread, and we're down the rabbit hole with her. It's sort of our Alice in Wonderland analogy there. But it's really, but this is like, okay, we're into a conspiracy film, and I love, and I actually worked with a friend of mine who works at the Washington Post, gave me great advice on what is that interplay between someone who's leaking material from the government and a reporter. And having worked in Washington and having been a journalist myself, I was able to kind of put a lot of myself into that as well. And it is a fascinating push and pull that always happens. But yeah, it's a great, if people make it through that scene, they're sucked in,
Yeah,
I hope they are.
Definitely. So just really quick, because maybe I'm just a little too young to understand and I'm close, but what is the deal with the Wonder? Is that a thing with the Wonder Bread?
So we did the research, and ITT really did own Wonder Bread in the early 70s, which was just bizarre. And I don't think people knew it at the time. But if you go back historically, you can go, oh, wow, they really did. But ITT really was enmeshed in a big scandal with Nixon. That was front page news before Watergate, and probably would have been the scandal that Nixon would have been most remembered for if it weren't for Watergate. So ITT was, paying him back and forth. But the connection to Wonder Bread was something we kind of came up with, but it is based on real things, and the Weather Underground really did blow up an ITT building in spring of 73 in New York. So it was something that people were paying attention to a lot back then. The ITT part of it, that Wonder Bread thing, that's kind of it's a real connection, but it's kind of fictional putting it all together.
That's so cool and interesting. I never would have thought I'm gonna have to go in and take a look at that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You can really dive into it. And hopefully people do that with this film. Like there's nuggets of real truth in all the kind of the Watergate specific things. And yeah, if it gets people to start researching and go, oh wait, what was true? What isn't true? What was made up? That's kind of the fun part about it.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun film, and by the looks of it, people are enjoying it. I enjoyed it, and I hope that they continue to enjoy it.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Yeah, no, great Dan, talking to you, man.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for your insight on the film. It's always such a pleasure to get to know the person behind the lens and the editing and all of the sweat and hopefully not that many tears. Hopefully there were tears of joy at the end.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
Thank you very much. And
all right.
I hope to talk to you again. Nice to meet you.
All right, you betcha. All right, take care. Bye.
All right, bye.